friend of the show, Greg Rosenthal, tweeted during the game, like during the comeback, that it's very Kirk Cousins to not be playing that well during a 33-point comeback. You know what I mean? Like this was not an outrageous thing to say about that performance. I think it was fairly standard while it happened. But the thing that you bring up all the time, which is certain numbers create instant reactions to people's minds when you see them, right? Yep. The box score numbers, the classic 300 yards, 3 touchdowns game that gives you a passer rating over 100 and whatever it is. As soon as you see that, you immediately just have a picture in your brain of what that performance was. So when you see 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in a half of football that ended up in the greatest comeback of NFL of all time in NFL history, you immediately form a picture of what that performance was that may or may not bear any resemblance to what actually happened. So when you start going through it and breaking it down, I think it becomes an interesting analysis on PFF grade. Because, number one, we didn't charge him for either interception, right? He threw 2 interceptions, both of which were Jalen Reagor's fault.
Sorry. That was the other part of the perception thing, right? Because there's people are seeing 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, and they're actually applying the context to those 2 interceptions. Like, I saw those 2 interceptions. I know they were on Jalen Reagor.
Right.
PFF knows that. Okay, now where's the disconnect?
Right. So immediately, like, we are not, like, the grade isn't average or slightly below average, wherever it ends up, because, PFF is dumb. We don't understand that those 2 interceptions were on Jalen Reagor. He was never charged for those 2 interceptions. Like, we had that weeded out immediately. So that's not the reason he was ever downgraded. But when you start going through, it is kind of fascinating because the yardage, like we know, by the way, that overall passing yardage is just a crappy measure of quarterback play. Like that didn't change just because it ended up in a win at the end of it all. At the point where they were 33-0 at halftime, he was going to end up with a monster passing total regardless of what the final score was of the game because he was going to be passing pretty much every down of the second half, right?
Yep.
So that part was inevitable. Like Matt Schaub owns the second highest single game passing total in NFL history, right?
Well learned.
He in fact owns 2 of the top 20. It didn't mean that Matt Schaub was amazing in those games. It just means that there are games where a guy has an absolute ton of passing opportunities. Cousins, if you include no plays, attempted 59 passes in this game. So he's going to put up a ton of yards. And then you say, all right, what's he actually doing in this comeback? And when you start going through it play by play, there aren't that many plays where he's making like a really nice, again, above expectation type of play. There's a lot of stuff, 280 yards after the catch from his receivers, including that Dalvin Cook play, which is like the poster child for the point we always make, you know? You always sort of draw up a for instance. Like, why is passer rating a crappy number? Well, imagine throwing a screen to a receiver who then busts through 4 tackles, takes it 64 yards and scores a touchdown. It's a 64-yard touchdown pass. It's a great play by the quarterback statistically, but actually the play was that Dalvin Cook play where he just turns around, fires it at him on a bubble screen. It's a play you expect every single quarterback in the NFL to make. Cousins doesn't get upgraded for that. It's just the play. Dalvin Cook did all the work. That's 64 of his 400 and whatever yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, so look, there's a couple things at play. First of all, I think you trying to argue with Vikings fans after this game is stupid because the fans just want to enjoy the comeback. They just want to enjoy the comeback, enjoy the win, and feel good about it. I don't think the happy fan day after the game is our demographic all the time because our grades try to get to the truth of what actually happened.
By the way, I didn't start this. Like I mentioned it on the podcast that some people were unhappy with the grade, which is what we do.
You just let it die.
Which is what we do here, right? The people that then came after me on Twitter because of taking that clip and posting it online, and then he won NFC Player of the Week this week, so I got 1 million people in my mentions being like, what do you think now? As if that changes anything, right?
Like Rayshon Jenkins got it because a dropped pass landed in his hands and he ran it in for the game winner for the Jaguars, right? Like that's how Player of the Week is determined.
Yep.
Our audience understands that. Here's like one sequence though that I think there's nuance to all this.
Of course,
there's nuance to all this. Here's the nuance, right? Here's where I want to give Kirk Cousins credit. Where we have criticized him in the past is in late game situations he has generally struggled. He's gotten better in recent years, and this year it's been out of this world incredible. That the Vikings just win these late game situations, and he's in the middle of a lot of these comebacks. Where we have criticized him before is there's all these games historically where there's a 2-score lead and he's just like checking it down and accumulating stats, and in all that stuff. There's a 3-play sequence before the Dalvin Cook thing where the Vikings have the ball at the Colts 40. They're down 8, and this is why the comeback was so weird, Sam. Like I said on the show, it wasn't like everything just went right for the Vikings in the second half. They actually had some failed opportunities, right? Mm-hmm. It's 1st and 10 on the Colts 40 with three minutes left, and I'm going to give Cousins credit because he throws the ball beyond the sticks 3 straight times, but he misses every single throw. Right? They're all going to be misses. They're all negatively graded throws. But where we had criticized him in the past for being a little bit too conservative and not being aggressive, this actually worked out. This was actually a very Andrew Luckian type of game for Cousins, where it wasn't so much turnover-worthy plays like Luck used to have, but Luck was always aggressive and he would throw these low percentage passes, but you kind of have to throw these low percentage passes in comeback attempts, which Luck found himself in a lot early in his career. So Cousins is aggressive, throwing the ball down the field. He misses on a back shoulder, he misses on a comeback, and he overthrows Justin Jefferson on a deep out where Stephon Gilmore breaks on it. It's 3 straight misses, right? Theoretically, comeback attempt might be over because they're gonna give the ball back to then on 4th and 15, they got to go for it on 4th down, right? 4th and 15, and he tries to scramble. He scrambles for 1 yard. Instead of actually making a play there. So I actually give him credit. But like that is a terrible 4-play sequence. Could have ended the game for the Vikings. But don't worry, they got the ball back 30 seconds later because the Vikings defense made a stop. His very next pass was the 64-yard screen to Dalvin Cook for the touchdown. So again, as a Vikings fan, you're watching this and you're just like, we did it. We just tied it up. This is incredible. But like on the 5-play sequence for Cousins was misthrow, 4th down scramble for a yard, 14 yards short, screen for a 64-yard touchdown. Now, I'm not saying this is the entire game. I'm saying this is a 5-play sequence where if you're a Vikings fan watching this thing, you're not remembering the 4 bad plays. You're remembering Dalvin Cook just weaved through the defense, and Cousins gets 64 free yards and EPA and all that stuff out of it.
That's the thing. It's so outcome driven. And by the way, like this, the fact that PFF grade isn't particularly high on him, again, it's not a particularly out there suggestion when you look at other sources of information. ESPN's QBR thought it was a trash grade. Now, okay, that I think dings him for the 2 picks, right, that weren't on his fault. But
yes.
The point being, like QBR thought it was crappy. Greg Rosenthal said it was crappy while it was happening. EPA per play, it's not the best game in the world either because the first half happened, right? Mm-hmm. And EPA per play, like he has several games better than that this year. And like this is good. If the Colts basically score at any point in the second half, he loses this game and nobody's talking about it. It's like, Cousins put up 400 yards of garbage time in the second half, and it didn't matter because they lost the game because they were 33-0 down nothing. You know what I mean? The entire narrative changes based off something that was not in his control if the Colts simply score a touchdown like at any point in the second half. And look, this is going to sound very negative because we're trying to articulate why the grade wasn't amazing. But he made some great plays in there as well, which you're going to do if you throw the ball 59 times in a game. Like less than a minute left of the game. In overtime, time's ticking down. If you want to win the game, you got to do something now. 1st and 10, he fires an absolute dart into, was it Adam Thielen?
Yep.
On a dig route. The location is perfect. He keeps it away from the linebacker so that Thielen doesn't get murdered and that he can just drop back, pick up some yardage. That takes them from, where were they on this play? Like the 30-something yard line? The 39-yard line puts them into Indianapolis territory by a good distance. And that kind of changes the complexion between you're probably not winning this game and you've got a shot at it.
That's the other part of this whole equation where it's like, of course it feels good coming out. Probably the best throw Cousins made, or the best completion he had at least, was that dig route to Adam Thielen.
Yeah,
right? Like,
great,
was that
great
pass
throw.
With 48 seconds left in the game. Mm-hmm. That gets them into Indianapolis territory. Then after that, what happened after that to get into the game-winning field goal? Misses a throw on an out route, so there's another miss in there, and then it's a screen pass for 13 yards that puts them in position for the game-winning field goal. So it was almost like, this is where I said it was like luck. Luck always felt like the grade was lower than the feels. Andrew Luck, not Luck itself.
Right.
The Andrew Luck feel was like he'd always overthrow on 2nd and 10 and then make a great 3rd and long conversion. Yeah. It's like, it doesn't matter, right? You converted, right? You got the conversion. It doesn't matter that you missed, but it kind of like offsets, right? A bad play and a good play, they offset each other. To me, that was very much Cousins in this game. He had a lot of offsetting type of plays where, especially in the second half, there was, things generally went in Minnesota's favor.
A few plays that I want to talk about a little bit more specifically, because I think they're very relevant to how the grade is compiled. So we didn't charge him for either interception. Those were both on Jalen Reagor. He did, however, throw the ball straight to a DB in the end zone, arguably two defensive backs in the end zone, on what was just a bad read. Justin Jefferson was coming across the field. He was going to get pressure up the middle. He completely misread Jefferson's sort of capacity to outrun a guy in the back of the end zone, get around him, put the ball into what was supposed to be a gap between two DBs, and actually ended up being just two DBs converging on the ball, right? That wasn't caught, wasn't intercepted. That would have been a backbreaker. Like, that would have been probably game over at that point. So that's a turnover-worthy play that is independent of the two interceptions that we didn't charge him with, that nobody remembers. Like, that's a play that happened that would have ended the game pretty much for the Vikings. That's not in anybody's memory anymore because of the way the game ended up, right? He had a couple of other passes that were really pretty risky. Not quite up to the level of turnover-worthy plays, but there was one that was behind Jefferson on a kind of comeback route on the sideline that Stephon Gilmore broke up and Jefferson had to stop being an interception. There was another one between two receivers, basically in no man's land over the middle, that when you miss a receiver over the middle, bad. Like, you're putting that in the way of safeties and linebacker. It's very risky. So he had a couple of misses that were not just like routine, harmless, nothing misses, but actually could have been very bad. And then there's two big plays to KJ Osborne that I think are interesting plays. The one, remember, where it looked like a bomb catch and then they took it away from Osborne on replay because the ground forced it to move or whatever.
Yeah.
Now that play, so the Colts defense was busting coverages left, right, and center, by the way, which is another relevant thing. You can make a case that he missed, quote unquote, 3 touchdowns, the 2 plays to Osborne that were deep shots, and 1 to Adam Thielen where he just didn't even see him busting open ahead of the guy he aimed at. You know what I mean? So Thielen is about to score. If he sees him beyond the guy that he wants to throw the ball to, doesn't see it, doesn't even put it in the air to that guy. But the Osborne one, the first one, coverage bust by the Colts. He's running like a seam, like a fade up the
big box fade.
The numbers, puts his arm up. They've dropped coverage. Woohoo! Cousins sees it from the backside, sees it, puts the ball in the air. It's perfect distance. So it looks great on the sort of sideline view where you're only looking at the distance, but it's like 3 yards laterally out towards the sideline as opposed to the numbers. And that forces Osborne to make an admittedly ridiculously bad job of adjusting to it, which puts it kind of just out of his view or out of his reach, gets the cornerback back involved in it. If Cousins throws that 3 yards to the right with the same vertical distance, Osborne might still be running. Like, that's probably a touchdown. So I'm not saying we downgrade him for this, right? This is a positively graded play.
Be very careful with how you're wording this.
This is a positively graded play for Cousins. He saw that play. He hit his receiver. There's no scenario by which KJ Osborne shouldn't have a catch on that play, even though it ended up being an incompletion. It's a positive grade for Cousins. But the important part is he's leaving an even bigger positive on the table for what probably should have been a touchdown.
In all we're saying, and so again, to help you out with this point, which is a good one, it's not to say, well, Cousins' grade was this because he just was 3 feet to the left on one throw. We're not saying that. We're trying to bring all the evidence to the table here. It all comes together. Right? But what we're trying to do with the grade here, remember, we're trying to isolate the player and think about the opportunities that the Vikings offense had here, right? With the 2 big plays to Osborne, this one, which was left on the table. We're trying to isolate the quarterback's role from what these other opportunities were, right? So there was this busted coverage on one, this one where Osborne's running wide open through the defense. Those are great opportunities for the quarterback to accumulate stats. The stats are the thing that trigger in your brain what a guy did from a performance standpoint.
And the second Osborne play is another important one to talk about because, again, busted coverage. The Colts drop Osborne. He's running free over the middle. Cousins sees it, fires him. He's not under any pressure this time, or he's not under any pressure. He's just got an open lane, and he hits him, but he leaves it inside. He leaves it back a little bit. Osborne has to kind of stop and turn around and get the ball. It's a big play. Again, it's a positive grade. We're not downgrading him for this, but if he leads him into the place he's running to, that's a touchdown, and he doesn't. So he's picking up a positive grade, but he's leaving a bigger grade on the table, which he should have had if he'd put a more accurate football out there.
So the other way to think about this is the quarterback stat line that, again, that 34 for 54 for 460, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. That stat line is mostly driven by the quarterback, but it's very much driven by the actual receivers, the opportunities that the receivers presented to you, in the defense, right? When we talk about adjusting for defense, I think the PFF grade actually inherently does that a lot, right? Because if you make a great throw into tight coverage, it doesn't matter if you're playing against the 49ers or the Colts or the worst defense in the league. It's a great throw into a tight window. But if the defense is leaving wide open receivers all the time, you're probably going to have a lower grade than the stats show. So it's almost adjusted for automatically. You don't have to go and say, well, this stat line happened against the Niners, therefore it's more difficult, or it happened against the worst defense, therefore it's easier. It's kind of inherently baked in. Look at the grades, look at the stats, and say the defensive adjustment's kind of baked into that a little bit.
It's very difficult sometimes to articulate without going through play-by-play, which we don't have time to do on this podcast, which we can't do on Twitter because we're not able to put the film out there on a weekly basis. Here are the 17 different plays we're talking about. It's very difficult sometimes to articulate it without coming up with like examples, right? For instances or statistics that kind of try and make the point you're trying to make. So in this one, for example, you're like 280 yards after the catch, right? To try and illustrate the point that players like Dalvin Cook or KJ Osborne, whoever, are the guys driving that yardage total. So 400 yards is the thing that has everybody's attention. But you're like, yeah, but 280 of the 400 were after the catch. It was other guys driving it. So then people will come back and they say, well, your website, PFF.com, has made the point that quarterbacks contribute to yards after the catch. Accurate passes lead to yards after the catch. So being an accurate quarterback and generating high yards after the catch illustrates that a quarterback is doing a good job.
There's some level of correlation, yes.
Yes, it's true. And in large numbers, that's absolutely the case. But what the PFF grade can do is differentiate on a play-by-play level those plays. For example, right? Dalvin Cook's yards after the catch, nothing whatsoever to do with the quarterback, right? Nope. The only thing Cousins did that influenced that yards after the catch was not throw the ball like into the dirt, not throw an actively bad pass towards Dalvin Cook. But that's not like that's an expected play, right? You expect every quarterback in the NFL to be able to snap the ball, turn to his left, and fire it to a receiver on the line of scrimmage. It's just a routine play. Now, the 2 KJ Osborne plays we're talking about, I forget where the catch point was in those plays, but that's potentially, 50 more yards after the catch? Just making it up. I don't know exactly where they were. Let's call it 50, just for the case of making the point. That's 50 yards after the catch that ball location took off the board, right? So when we are saying he got 280 yards after the catch and his grade wasn't good, it's because his ball location generally in this game was not contributing to that yards after the catch. And in fact, it was taking away from it.
The 63-yarder to Osborne, which again, positive throw. I mean, it was correct. It was an easy throw overall, but it was you get a positive for recognizing it and getting it to him. Basically, the Colts are playing old school wide cover 2, but without the Tampa runner. Right. So a guy's running through the seam with nobody covering him. It's about 25 air yards or whatever. Where if he did put it on that front number, Osborne definitely scoring a touchdown. He does have to slow down, and he picks up a lot.
What's the catch point? How many yards does he leave on the
I think
table?
It's about 25 and probably 35 after the catch.
So there's 35 yards after the catch that could have been scored there. There's another, whatever that one over the middle was, where he made him spin around. Now, actually, he generated a lot of yards after the catch on his own after that. But my point being, the ball location, quarterbacks can create a lot of extra yards after the catch, but they don't always.
Right.
And in this case, this game, Cousins wasn't creating a lot of yards after the catch. In fact, he was working against the yards after the catch that could have been there.
That's the final point I would make, right? There's a 64-yarder and there's a 63-yarder in here. Let's just call it 120 yards of that 460. So of those, on those 2 plays, one was a screen, which was clearly all Dalvin Cook.
Yeah.
The other one was a small positive for Cousins, which again was more about bad defense than anything else. It was atrocious defense than anything else. And I think we're trained to only think that to give the quarterback full credit or blame for everything that happens. Like there are Cowboys fans who are still blaming Dak Prescott for the game-ending interception, the walk-off interception. Oh, he should have thrown it a little bit higher. He shouldn't have thrown it to Noah Brown. It's like he threw a catchable pass on third down that hit his receiver in the hands, and it bounced up into a pick six. And people still are, it's in your brain. Dak threw a pick six.
Right.
This is, Cousins threw a 63-yarder. He threw a 64-yard touchdown. But you take those two plays out, we're at 340 yards on 50-something dropbacks and everything.
I mean,
and so it's like those two plays, you don't take them out, but if you did, like Cousins had a little bit to do with the 120 yards on those two plays that completely changed his stat line.
Again, we talk a lot about how big are the slices on the credit pie for any given thing that happens in a football game, right? Or even not even a football game, like the season. How big of a slice of the credit pie does Tua deserve versus Mike McDaniel versus Tyreek Hill versus the offensive line improvements, all those kinds of things. So what we're asking here is, okay, the Vikings executed the greatest comeback in NFL history. How big a slice of the credit pie for that does Kirk Cousins deserve? And I think the answer for anybody looking at 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, and just the fact that it was the biggest comeback is like, most of it, almost all of it. It's all Cousins, right? Huge amount of the credit pie. But I think when you start going through it and dividing it up and looking at it play by play, it's actually a much smaller piece than that. It's not that he was did nothing, right? We're talking about that dime at the end of the game, just before the end of overtime. Beautiful play. He had a couple others, like one of his touchdowns to KJ Osborne was a perfect ball location. Very short pass, but like a perfect ball location that makes that an easy touchdown as opposed to something that might have been contested or whatever. Like, he made some very nice plays in here, but he relied on Dalvin Cook. He relied on KJ Osborne. The play calls were giving him a lot of free plays. The Colts, knowing they were 33 points up, were giving the Vikings an awful lot of free plays. The Colts not scoring for basically the entirety of the second half gave them a lot of opportunities to make these things. I just think in the overall credit pie, Cousins' slice actually isn't that big, but 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, the win, the NFC Player of the Week, causes people to think it should be much bigger. But I think his PFF grade should be average from this game.